Hey everyone, how you doing? This is the King Kong Dude, co-owner and founder of ORA Studios, and I'm just here to help you guys with a quick little setup guide for when the game does release this Sunday, or if you're in the future, just a general guide for you when setting up your car in the game, as the system is a little bit not as traditional or untraditional from the conventional setup methods that are used in modern road racing games. So just to kind of help you guys gain as much pace as you can, this is a little bit of a guide. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, when you are picking your track, you can either go to time trial, free drive, or of course race mode. I'll be doing time trial just so that way I can compare my times and go as fast as possible. Now, of course, I'm not the fastest driver out there. There are many drivers who are much faster than me, but this will just be a way to show you guys how you can gain time compared to your rivals. And it really starts from the time you're in the menu. You can actually see the layout and it shows you all the corners. So we see turn 1 here, turn 2, etc., all the way to turn 19. And this just kind of helps you get an idea of the track, and it actually can even give you an idea of how you want to set up your car. Now, of course, in Formula E, they don't really change too much the wings, so those aren't actually a setup option. But what you can look at is how much mechanical grip or low speed turning the car will be using. So we see a lot of these corners, they do appear to be low speed. We have a hairpin, a double hairpin, chicane, a little bit more than a 90-degree right. So for this track, we'll probably be looking to make something that has a lot of mechanical grip, not so much high-speed grip, although we will need it for this final corner, the Peraltada, because there is a lot of time to be gained there. The most important part of getting a setup around a track really isn't the setup itself, but it's actually learning the track and driving it. By driving it a lot, you're actually going to be able to develop a consistency to help you learn what things are good for a certain track and learn what things are bad for another track, which may be costing you lap time. So first and foremost, I'm going to do a banker lap to kind of understand how the car is driving, so that way I can make better setup changes. Alright, so that's the banker lap done. Obviously it calculated my laps coming out the pit. So my banker lap was a 1:12.3. The car felt alright, but compared to some setups I've made before, I definitely think that it can be a lot faster. So I'm going to go ahead and return to pits here. And I'm going to click on the setups button. And here I will be greeted by the very intimidating setups page. So we see here that there is camber. Now what this basically is, it is the angle of your tire as seen if you were looking at it from a frontward view. Now what this does is it will increase your contact patch on the very bottom of the tire as you are going through corners. So this will increase grip in especially low speed portions of the track, but it does come at a cost, especially here it will affect you on the rear end, on the straights especially, because the car will be a little bit slower in the straights as you have more camber. So if I were to click this all the way over to the left, that is the maximum amount of camber I can have. So I can have at most negative 2.5 camber, and of course the least amount of camber I can have is 0. Now this is mostly a thing of trial and error. You just have to kind of figure out which camber setting works for you. Maybe you want it to be a little bit more negative, maybe a little bit less negative. However, in these cars especially, you have to be very wary of how much camber you are putting in, as it will increase your likelihood for locking up. And of course, locking up is not ideal because you're not at the maximum amount of grip levels you could be in that corner. So for me, I'll start out with negative 0.5. I know there are a lot of low speed corner. Actually, I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna do start at negative 1. So I'll start at negative 1 camber for my first few laps, and I'll go from there. Next up is weight distribution. And this actually affects something that is called rake. Now rake is the amount of angle between the front of the car and the rear of the car. The most notable car actually to have this is the Red Bull RB16B, because its philosophy had a lot more rake as compared to the Mercedes, which had a lot less rake, and it actually gave them a big advantage. Really what we're looking to do here in these Formula E cars is increase the amount of rake, as much rake as we can without bottoming out the front end of the car. Now, what happens when you bottom out the front end of the car is as you are turning into the corners, you may feel an immediate loss of grip as you're turning in, because the car is so low, the tires are being driven in so heavily into the corner, as well as you lose straight line speed because you're not really balanced. So what we might want to do here is I'll click it up a bit. The default is 70, the minimum is 60, which would be the least amount of rake, and the highest is 80, which would be the most amount of rake. Mexico has quite significant bumps, so I think I'll only click it up to 74, and we'll go on from there. Now we got front anti-roll bar, which basically controls how the two front ends of the car are connected. So in your car, of course, you have the suspension, and these are joined together by the anti-roll bar. So the stiffer your anti-roll bar, the more direct the handling in that part of the car will be. As we see, there is both a front anti-roll bar and a rear anti-roll bar. So in the front end, you may want this to be a little bit more stiff because you do want the car to respond to your inputs. However, in prolonged turning movements, such as final corner around Mexico or just really any high-speed corners, the car will be more prone to understeer because you're not really allowing it to roll much. So for a track like Mexico, we may want to click this up a bit. We'll do about 38. We won't go to the maximum, which is 40, so that would be the stiffest option. But we won't go all the way here because we do want a bit of responsiveness for some of these low speed corners. So I'll put it up to 38. Then we have the rear anti-roll bar, which works the same but opposite. So the stiffer it is, obviously the more direct and the more you'll be able to turn and rotate with the rear of the car. But the car will be a little bit more unstable coming off of corner exits. So getting back on the power, the car might squirm a little bit more, the car might be a little bit more unstable. So for this track, there are a lot of low speed corners, but also I do like a little bit of directness. So I'll actually click it up just one from the default, so I'll put that at 51. Now we have our final drive, which is basically the final gear ratios of your car. Now of course in Formula E there is only one gear, so we won't be able to tune the whole transmission, but this is really what matters. So in order to gain a bit more top speed, we would have this at 0.99, but this comes at the cost of acceleration, which would be 0.01 final drive. For a track maybe like Rome, where you have a big mix of high speed and also low speed, maybe you would want to go for 1. For a track like Cape Town, you may want to go for 0.99, but I think from Mexico, we might be able to get away with something like this to get better acceleration out of the corners. Next up, we have suspension stiffness, which basically controls how stiff the car is, or just how stiff the suspension is, which obviously has a large effect on the turning ability of the car. So the softer it is, obviously, you'll be able to go over curbs more easily. So that's this 2500 value is. But the stiffer you go, which is obviously clicking the value up, the stiffer the suspension will be. So you'll feel a lot more of the curbs. You'll probably bounce over them more, and the car will feel a lot more unstable as you go over them. So for a track like Mexico, we know through stadium section, the curbs are really stiff. So I'll actually want to click this almost down to the very last value, just to above the final value, just so that way I can keep the car in check as I go over the curbs while still having some good handling. The rear suspension stiffness works the same. They actually had the exact same values. But I do kind of want the rear of the car to be a little bit stiffer, just so that way as I'm rotating through slow speed corners like the chicane, I can actually have some really good balance and rotation. And then finally, we have brake pressure, which has a lot to do with lockups. This is the only real reason why you would want to change this, because otherwise you're actually increasing your braking distance. So the least amount of brake pressure, that would be 950. So you would have the longest braking zone in order to get into a corner. And then maximum would be 1000. So that way you can have the shortest distance. or shortest braking distance as you head into a corner. So this is the default setup I'm going to run with, and I'll go ahead and try it out. Alright, it wasn't my best sector 1, but I did have an improvement, so that's a 3/10 improvement already. And honestly, it really was not my best final sector, but I felt a lot of improvement in sector 1, in the front end grip overall. So the front end felt good, but now I'm feeling like the rear is a little bit too unstable. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to soften the rear anti-roll bar. I'm actually going to click down the softness another 2. I'm just going to go ahead and drive out now. And I'll let you guys know about, or see how much time I can gain, or how the car feels after that. That was it. Alright, across the line. Oh wow, that was a much bigger improvement than I expected. And that was exclusively from tuning the rear suspension. But that just goes to show there's a whole lot of time to be gained by doing setups and by doing laps like this. If you kept going, you could probably make an even faster setup. This is just a pretty basic thing. Mexico really isn't my favorite track, and it's definitely not my best track. But that's just a basic setup that's made in probably a little bit less than 5 minutes. Just by taking out a little bit of time to go into time trial, figuring out some setups, changing your anti-roll bars and stuff like that, you can actually gain a lot of time. I could probably even go for some more camber. That could probably give me a few tenths. But as you can see, just by making some of these basic setup changes, I was really able to get the car a lot faster. And of course, that'll help me in the races when I head over to race mode, win more, and earn more watts. So that's just a basic guide on how to do setups in Formula Volt. I'll probably be making some more guides as well for the game as I see more questions roll in. Hopefully I see you all for the launch on Sunday, and we'll see you then. Bye.